This is in response to the Chris Matthews show on Tuesday, May 19th, 2015. Iraq War, mistake or crime? And I'm going to go with crime. And as Dick Cheney would say, big time. Now, Chris had a guy on named Mike Morrell. Mike Morrell was some type of deputy CIA chief somewhere in the CIA during the Bush administration. He worked for George Tenet. Chris was pressing him on a lot of issues. He was basically indicating, I don't know what Bush thought. I don't know what Cheney thought. I don't, et cetera, et cetera. He didn't really claimed he wasn't really aware of all of the media that was going on before the war. And of course, he was probably some nerd, and he was working 12 to 14 hours a day. He was giving all of his information to Tenet. He was getting information from here, processing it, taking it to here, goes up the pipeline, so to speak. But Chris kept on pressing him, where did they get this information from? Where is that true? Is this true? And let's just take a quick look back on what it was like before the war, because what Chris is basically insinuating here is if we're going to say mistakes were made, what were those mistakes and why did we make them? And were they so egregious that we should actually call them war crimes? So this is just pretty much off the top of my head. Now, some of the stuff that I remember was, number one, they had a big thing about ricin. And if I remember correctly, that they were equating the fact that Saddam could possibly have had the possibility of having a UAV, which was then called a unmanned aerial vehicle, which we now call a drone, that supposedly could go from Iraq, to the United States and then just spray ricin all over the place. And they had all these scenarios. What would happen if it happened in New York City? Or what if a terrorist got on the top of the Empire State Building and dropped ricin? And how much it would take to kill you and all of that other stuff. And of course, the Iraqi government had no type of unmanned aerial vehicle could remotely do anything like that. And there was no proof that they had ricin or any of this other stuff. So, of course, that was part of some of the stuff that was being peddled. Now, remember, they talked about the mobile labs, where the low mobile labs is like a meth lab, but they were making ricin and they were making sarin gas and whatever other, I can't remember the crap that they were making. And they had this elaborate thing about how they did it and how they made it. And this is what you have to look for. And remember when Hans Blitz was walking around and they were talking about how all the scientists would run out the back door when Hans would run in the front door? None of that was true. None of that was even remotely close to being true. And remember how they talked about the 20,000? No, well, I know the 20,000 centrifuges deal with Iran right now. But remember they talked about the centrifuges and, that these were weapon grade centrifuges. And no, these were just things that you would pack bombs in that they could be using for their own defense. But of course, Condoleezza Rice, she never was presented that option by the Department of Energy. They said, no, this is not a bomb grade type of thing that you use or a centrifuge. No, the cylinder is way too small. It has to be much bigger. It has to be much more sturdier. This is the type that you pack some munitions in and you shoot it. But no, they had to go through all of that happy stuff. And then, of course, what was remember that guy Muhammad Atta? Muhammad Atta was supposedly meeting with Al-Qaeda figures in Prague. Remember how Cheney, that's his real name, Cheney, would say that all the time? Well, it's pretty well established that, etc. But that never happened. And they proved that it didn't happen. And what was that other thing? And then I think the stuff on the mobile labs came from someone they called Red Ball, who was supposedly an engineer in Iraq that had all these details on it. And the caveat of the whole thing is that he was in jail or in prison in Germany, and Germany sent the information to the United States and says, "Hey, don't believe any of this shit because this guy's wacko." Or something to that effect. So all of this stuff got proven wrong. And remember, Bush got up there and said, we have now found that Iraq has bought significant quantities of yellow cake from, was it Nigeria, Niger, or whatever, one of those countries. And of course, after the war, and Joe Wilson wrote the article in the New York Times, I believe, anonymously, and they poked around. They found out who Joe Wilson was, and they outed his wife, who was a CIA operative working on nuclear disarmament. That's the kind of people we were dealing with, because it would have blown the whole lid off their whole thing. That he was going, and that was the big thing. Chris kept on saying, that a lot of discussions they had on MSNBC when he was there at the time was that, all this other stuff, they haven't attacked us. There's no real proof of connection to 9/11. But then the atomic bomb thing, the mushroom gas, the smoking gas, mushroom cloud, blah, blah. So in the lead, and then before the 2002 election, when Bush wanted the authority to basically mobilize everything to start the war, he basically indicated in a major speech that you would be pretty unpatriotic if you did not vote for this resolution, which was before the 2002 election. And there was probably a number of Democrats who were sitting on the fence that it could affect them in the election, that they might seem unpatriotic. And then a lot of other Democrats who weren't up for election, that would be just the senators, of course, they said, like Hillary Clinton, was that what if this was actually true? And they did find weapons of mass destruction, and she had voted against the authorization. You see, so Bush had a catch-22 in there. And, if you look back on the speeches that he made, the sincerity he portrayed about saying all that stuff. And remember, remember, Dick Cheney, when he was Secretary of Defense in 1991 or 92, says we can't go to Baghdad because that would be a quagmire. And Colin Powell says, no, we're going to stop at the water's edge, or whatever, the sand's edge from Kuwait to Iraq back in 1991, 1992, whenever that, I can't remember the exact date. No, it was 1991 when it started, at the end of the first Iraq War. So Dick Cheney, and then again, who'd they get to go before the United Nations? And Cheney, it was Colin Powell, and he said he checked, and basically all these people that he was checking with to make sure that all the stuff that he said at the United Nations, which was all lies, he was being told time and time again, this is all true. And remember, the other thing was that the Bush-Cheney administration, everyone there knew right from the beginning of 9/11, this gave them their opportunity to go in to get out Saddam Hussein, because they used everything they could. Remember, when they first had 9/11, Bush talked about the axis of evil. We knew we could never go into North Korea, and you could never go into, you could easily go into Iran too. But the thing is, Iran is about twice the size of Iraq. It also is a lot more mountainous, and it had almost 3 times the population of Iraq. And it had a better army, so to speak, a much larger standing army. So we took the easiest route that we could, because that was the available bad guy that we knew we could do. And we used every trick, every subterfuge, every insinuation, outright lies. And remember stovepiping? Stovepiping was basically Cheney would get information from the CIA that was at the lowest levels before it had been vetted, before it had determined whether or not that report was actually true. It would go right up to Cheney, and he would get all these crazy ideas about what it meant, and it would all of a sudden be true. So all of the things that we thought before the war that we thought were true, because we wanted to trust our government and our top government officials, Cheney, Bush, Rumsfeld, Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell, and then all of their underlings. And remember Wolfowitz, who basically sat there and said, it's only going to cost about $2 billion to go in there and out. And I don't know who the general was. I can't remember his name. It sounds like Sincheki, but it was somebody else, I'm pretty sure. Another long name. And they asked him how much it would cost. He said, about 200 or 300 billion at least, And of course, that was more than aptly true, because there will probably be 10 times 300 billion that it's going to cost us. This was our government doing this to the United States people, and they did what they wanted to do, which was they took their opinions, they took their feelings, they took their gut reactions, and then they changed the facts to meet that, as opposed to, finding out what the facts are and then forming your opinion. Despicable war crimes by the Bush administration.